The first speaker to continue the discussion on generative AI is Jovanovic, the lead art director at Play Studios Europe. Ivan is in charge of creative direction as well as testing and introducing new tools and work methodologies. He will now talk about implementing a Stable Diffusion-based generative AI toolset in artists' workflow. Ivan, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Hi. Okay, let me see. Cool. I'm Ivan. Again, I'm lead art director for the Play Studios Art Leads. And I've been exploring for, I think, about a past year. Yeah, exactly from the past November until today. I've been exploring intensely Stable Diffusion-based workflows and also seeing in which way they can be integrated with our usual design workflows. Where do I point to? Okay, cool. So just as a quick overview, I'll cover the intro, then Stable Diffusion and open source ecosystem briefly. Most of my talk is going to be about the tools and our production pipelines, and a brief conclusion on what I've learned through that process. What was the motivation behind that? We have in games, we produce certain types of assets all the time, and I wanted to see how AI can contribute and help in our workflows and pipelines in terms of optimizing our workflow, but also allowing us to kind of integrate in the way our designers usually work in their design workflow and make this new technology be seamless, be a tool, not be a crutch, or not be something that's going to replace our normal workflow. So types of assets that we usually deal with are characters, their backgrounds, objects and items, UI elements. And the goal was, again, what I already stated, integrating into the usual artist pipeline. But also I wanted to test additional two things. I wanted to test the output consistency over a series of assets, and I also wanted to test the speed, or rather increase of speed that we can gain from this. I chose the open source route because, as you all know, a lot of people chose stuff like Midjourney or similar, I'd say, subscription-based tools. I wanted to test the open source way because I found the community for open source to be very vibrant and alive, and things were moving quite fast in that space, and also that's for one. And another thing is that open source allowed us to basically use the tools in whichever way we wanted and to customize them in whichever way we wanted. So most of my exploration was based on Automatic11, along with some extensions for Automatic11, most notably ControlNet extension, also upscalers. And I've been using, from what you saw on this slide, I've also been using node-based Comfy UI toolset. As for hardware setup, I also wanted to see what was the kind of a bare minimum for hardware requirements that would allow artists kind of a seamless and I would say comfortable workflow. And my initial hardware for this was i7 equivalent processor by AMD. The most important thing was actually the video RAM. I chose the GPU which had enough video RAM which would allow me to do both inference and training. And also I've come to a conclusion that Linux-based tools worked on average a bit faster than Windows-based. So again, the overarching, I would say, theme for this exploration from my side was to see if I can harness the complexity of the tools and randomness of the tools and actually get something that's controllable. That was the main goal. I'm going to start from the basics of building the images and then going into more details and adding more layers of control. Of course, what we have learned since the LLM systems became prominent is that we first start with prompts. I'm still kind of on the fence about prompt engineering as a term. I believe there is a merit to it, and especially judging by this slide, we do need to invest time in prompt building, because a basic prompt will give us a generalized output, which is not maybe something that we can control, or is going to be not great of a quality. And if we start kind of expressing ourselves more and being more verbose with the prompt and getting into really, I would say, specifics of what we want to describe, I found, of course, that the results tend to be better to an extent, because we can overdo it again. So that's about prompting, but I really hope that in some 5 to 10 years' time, we're going to regard prompting as something that's primordial to these systems, because I think that of all of the pipeline for AI tools, currently prompting is the most, I'd say, is the worst. I don't want to be rough, but it is worst. And that's, I guess, also the biggest context switch that we need to make as artists. We need to describe in words. And I found that if you have a good English vocabulary, that's going to help you a lot with this, which is a skill set that we may need to have previously. Now, I think we do. So next layer of control is actually to add custom styles to our image generation. These custom styles, I picked random styles, but these custom styles are something that we can train ourselves to shift the network into knowing additional concepts and generating additional concepts. These styles are represented by additional network structures such as LoRa's, such as hypernets, such as textual inversions. And I think they're a really powerful way in which we can mix and match styles and try to cherry pick best of the worlds. Of course, with this as well, we can go overboard. If we give network, I guess, more than 3 styles, the network is just going to get confused. So as long as we give it a couple of styles, maybe 1 style, it's going to work as we intended. And then we've been doing a bunch of experiments where we wanted to push actually all of this and see how we can mix and match and maybe cross-pollinate generations. This is the example where we are actually using image to image. We're using one concept, another concept as the guiding concept, and then we're kind of getting the splice between the two. One thing that I found really interesting that worked, surprisingly, is that we can mix concepts which are not similar. So we can mix objects, we can mix characters, and then it would try to do a kind of an infusion of the concepts. This was, again, one of the things that I've been doing and I found really interesting. I can take one concept, maybe artist-made or maybe AI-generated. I can take another concept and I can do a walk through the seed value or maybe through the denoising value, and I would get a kind of morphing between the subjects, which I also found as one additional cool way in which we can control how much we shift to a certain style or a subject. Again, another layer of control. I think that generative networks, as far as the images are concerned, weren't really useful until we got control nets, because the compositions at least were random. Now with control net structures, we can actually control different aspects of our image generation in really cool ways. This is an example of a control net where we insert a reference. We use a net to create a preprocessor stage for us. This is the stick figure that we see, and the stick figure is going to act as a guide for us to actually generate our composition. And this is, I guess, more of the same. We lock the pose in place, and then we can do whatever we want around the composition and design of the elements. This also creates some novel ways in which we can, again, combine all of this. For this example in particular, I was using a base image which is not even on the slide. It was something different, but it was a pose of a figure in this angle and in this crop. And then I tried to, through prompt, get completely different subjects and light conditions and then, I guess, styles. So one other way in which you can really kind of lock in on a certain aspect of control, but then change everything else around it. And this is, I guess, the place where I want to show where we can insert ourselves as the artists. This is not the only way. I will show you we can insert ourselves at the beginning of the process, in the middle of the process, at the end of the process. But let's say we created initial design and we want to get into Photoshop and refine that design. This is the way we can do it. We clean up the noise. Why? Because we can use this as the intermediate steps to actually create design variants. And this is the process. We take the cleaned up design from Photoshop, we insert it into Stable Diffusion again, and we are either gonna work on the composition as a whole, again using control net as the locking of the control element, or I can zero in on particular elements of the design and actually vary those particular elements of design as much as I want. Whether I take those particular elements and then get them into Photoshop, work on them through overpaint and then get them back into Stable Diffusion, it's really very versatile in terms of where we can interact with the system. Again, more of the same. This part of the process, at least when we're doing, I guess, the traditional design route, is very time consuming. If we want to iterate on a certain design, we usually take quite a time to produce a substantial number of design variations. With this process in particular, we can provide an initial design by the artist, and then we can task Stable Diffusion to help us out with variants and see how much we can push design. Another layer of control, and this ties to, I guess, the right side of the slide as well. I can zero in on particular elements, but then I can create, I guess, very simple but descriptive shapes that will allow me to guide the generation process further. And then I modify the prompt, and then I ask actually the network to focus in only on the detail that I painted over. And this is very crude, because I wanted to actually show you how little you can invest in this, but you can actually create a very elaborate design in Photoshop and then take it into Stable Diffusion to just create very small variations in design. With backgrounds, it's basically dissimilar, and this is where I guess we can see the pattern in which we are building the images through Stable Diffusion. We start with a very basic prompt. We're going to get some generalized output, and this is enough for us to at least infer if we are moving into the right direction with generation. But then, if we want to create something more specific that we had in mind, we need to work on the prompt building part. And we can, again, infuse styles, we can infuse elements of control, other stuff as well, but the process is the same for every type of object, I would say. And also, taking parallel from the way we work in design, in traditional sense, we are moving from generalized to more specific. So we will start rough, we will create rough designs at first, but then we will start refining and zeroing in on the design that we like. For instance, this is the example where we can use a different type of control, which is the depth map. For those of you who have worked in 3D, you probably know what this is. You can either create a depth map from a generated image in Stable Diffusion, or you can create a depth map by rendering the depth pass in one of the 3D softwares of your choice. And then you can use it as a guide again for generating new images. One thing that I didn't mention with this method is that we can modify how much we want to give control to the control element. We can either give it a very strict control and then it's going to strictly adhere to the shapes that we provide, or we can give it very loose control and then it's going to have more freedom to give us options. This is again more of the same, where I wanted to again illustrate that, okay, we do have element of control, but you can work within it with any type of subject matter that you want. And you can change it pretty drastically. This is an instance, an example where I actually show how much we can go back and forth between Stable Diffusion and Photoshop. And in that regard, I think that we can view it as just an additional tool for the artist to help out with certain elements of design process. For instance, here I've been using Stable Diffusion to give me initial designs for the bracelet. I went into Photoshop and kit bashed and painted over the elements of design that I liked, but then I went back into Stable Diffusion and tasked it to iterate on the design that I provided. And that's the way we can kind of iteratively zero in on the design that we like. Again, these drawings are very crude, but they do illustrate the point where we can actually start from the design side, and we can start as simply as we want or as a complex design as we want as the basis, and then we can actually task the Stable Diffusion network to give us a suggestion of how these elements can work fully rendered. One of the, I guess, bigger challenges that I've faced when I was looking into different types of assets that can be done through Stable Diffusion was certainly typography and UI elements, because I guess for those of you who have tried to prompt for typography in Midjourney or similar networks, you will have probably found that it doesn't work. But it does work if you give it a guide. So if you provide it a design and task it to give you a render variance of that design, you can guide it in that direction as well. And this goes the same with UI elements such as frames. We can give it a basic shape, and then we can actually task it to give us variants of this shape and to give us rendered out suggestions of the shape that we provided. And again, depending on how much freedom we give it, it can strictly adhere to the shape that we give it, or it can go nuts. And for the end, I don't know if I've been pacing myself well. For the end, I wanted to show you an example where I've actually kind of went through the entire process for a series of images. I only had, I guess, a brief that I gave myself where I wanted to explore if I can create images which are of similar style and quality, but each image should be a completely different theme. So using all of the elements of the tool set that I've described so far, I've been able to create this. And to give you a bit of a, I guess, ballpark on how much it took about a couple of hours per image with all of the design iterations and back and forth Photoshop, Stable Diffusion, Photoshop, Stable Diffusion. So that leads me to the conclusion part, I guess, and what I learned from all of this. The whole process, I think, can speed up the design process to 30 to 50%, but this is, I think, also very conservative. Depending on the task, depending on the asset type, I think that the time saving can be even greater. And also it depends how much you want the tool set to integrate with your pipeline. If you want it less, if you want it for reference images, if you want it for idea generation, then the rest is up to you. If you want to integrate it to give you refinement of the design or maybe the polish phase, then it really depends. So it does depend on the pipeline that you create for yourself. But my finding was that you can, for a wide range of graphical assets, create a certain pipeline that can work. What I just mentioned with all of these examples is that you can integrate the tool set with all of the stages of the creative process. It really depends on what you're aiming for. One thing that I did learn, because we also tested this a little bit with the different artists, is that you do need skilled artists. That's the very important point for people when they ask whether this is going to replace artists in any way. You need a skilled artist to be able to use this system. Why? Because if you're looking at generating an isolated image, like an illustration, what you get from Midjourney and stuff like that, it doesn't take a lot of skill to do that. You need to work a little bit on your prompt building, but that's about it. But if you need to work on a specific brief, such as is the asset list for a game, then you really see in those circumstances where an artist and his or her skill or expertise really comes into play, because now they are the ones who are actually acting as directors. Now they are the ones who are actually filtering out the options that are most suitable for the brief and zeroing in on the design that we need. So my finding was that this is useful, but in the hands of a skilled artist. The amount of the produced assets, whether we are talking just about idea and reference generation, is very large. So even if you're using this only for references, you are able to generate, I'm going to again say in a ballpark, within one working day, you can generate up to 500, 600 images as ideas. And then you can kind of cherry pick the elements of design that you find fit a certain theme. We've also been working a little bit with artists to actually see how user-friendly this is, because it is a context switch. As I said, working with prompts is something that we are not used to. That's for one. Another thing is that these systems are random. They are more random than us thinking about design and producing a design. So we kind of needed to come to terms with this randomness and actually build an intuition on how we can use these programs, build an intuition on how we can prompt the system so that we can get an output, an outcome that we actually want. But what I found, it was a bit surprising, but it is what it is. I found that artists responded really well to the process and to the tools, because it really did allow them to generate ideas faster, and if they have a design idea, to iterate on that design idea, like a specific part of the design, or maybe just as an idea for design. Limitations that I found so far. One is adherence to a very specific art style. You get what you get from the data set of the trained network. But that's why I said the route that I chose for open source does provide a solution for that, and which is the custom training. Less presence in data set means less options for generation. Again, that's similar. And one thing that I did notice, I've been doing this for a year, as I said, I've been looking at a lot of images from Midjourney and a lot of images from Stable Diffusion. All of these images tend to look samey after a while. And you can you can build knowledge and intuition in seeing what is AI generated, which I think is a good thing. Which means we can't simply just enter a few words, generate an image, and call it done. If we want to create, I would say, a very specific aesthetic for our games, we do need to be ourselves present in it and not just create a bunch of words and finish with it. So that's about it. That's my talk. Thank you. Yes.
Question? Mikrofon. Možeš u prvom redu čoveku.
Hi, I would like to ask you, did you try to make a consistent character, like for animation of the character? Because all of what we see is for the GUI, for the back scenes, for the splash scenes and everything, it's working very good. But if you want to make a 2D animation of a character, can you use this Stable Diffusion?
That's a very good question. As you probably saw, those of you who are following the developments, currently there are very basic attempts to actually do the animation. And just yesterday, I think Stability AI announced that they are putting out the video model. It's very good, but it gives you, I think, a few seconds of video. I think that currently animation through AI doesn't work for games in particular, because at best it will give you a series of PNG images, and we can't afford to put a bunch of PNG images in engines. We do need to use tools such as Spine or Unity or whatever we're working with, and to actually create skeletal animations which have, JSON files for parameters and just an atlas for the textures. So for gaming, no.
So consistency is a problem. So if you want the same character in triple or four multiple poses,
It's getting better. I think that we are maybe a month away from being able to do what you said, to create consistent poses. How much we'll be able to change the angle depends.
Not just the poses, but the character, the same character to be in different poses. So you mean
Yeah, yes, that's what I mean, yes.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Yeah, question. Thank you, Ivan. So, in your process, you said like Stable Diffusion, Photoshop Stable Diffusion. Have you tried using like Photoshop Beta or something like just to shorten the process? Because I think it's like innovating right now to use the Photoshop Beta and their prompt generation.
I did. I didn't find enough freedom in options. I think that we will all converge after a while to a small set of tools, and they're going to be integrated probably through big tools such as Photoshop and similar. But for now, I really wanted to take the opportunity through open source to actually test what's the range of possibilities. Photoshop currently doesn't offer as much, especially when it comes to custom networks and styles.
And did you try to train your own model just to shorten the time from like?
Yes, at least for these examples that you saw, I did the training for textual inversions, which is very fast training method, and you need maybe 10 to 20 images for the data set.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I was wondering, because you showed some examples of how backgrounds are generated, and they seemed kind of like these simple nature backgrounds without, let's say, complex composition. And I was wondering, what's the state of generating backgrounds with like multiple characters, like background characters and things like that? Because I know there's problems with like arms missing and things like that, and that's kind of become.
That's a great question, because I've been also testing that as well. And this ties to my note that you need a skilled artist to use this. These networks and systems currently, they can't generate complex compositions. Why? Because you give the network too many concepts to work on. And if you give it more than a couple of concepts, such as background and character, it gets confused because it doesn't know how to prioritize in the output what you want to see. So you're either going to use a control net to try to control parts of the composition, or you're going to do composition in stages, like do the background, do the characters, integrate them, and then create a complex composition.
Right, so is there work on using these control nets on like how you select the pose of the character with like the skeleton, of like doing that with multiple people in the background? Like, is that possible? Are people working towards that?
I think it's possible, but again, you're dealing with multiple concepts at the same time. I guess your best route would be to create character per character and then integrate them. One thing that Stable Diffusion can do, if you have disparate elements in terms of lightning style and stuff like that, you can splice it all together and give it to go through a kind of an integration pass.
Right. And this is all part of these tools and like front ends for Stable Diffusion?
Yeah.
Or they can be
But
found?
I did hide a lot of complexity here. If you go into Automatic11, you're going to get like 5 million options. So you do need to invest time in learning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have time for a very quick question if somebody wants to ask. I guess not. So, Ivan, here's the certificate of appreciation, and I would like to thank you as well as Play Studios for being one of Pandora's sponsors. Great talk.
Thank you. Thank you.